Welcome to DEscussions, the podcast where we explore the intersections of education, technology, and innovation to spark ideas and conversations that drive meaningful change. I'm Brad Dennison, your host and EdTech enthusiast, here to connect you with thought leaders and strategies to transform the way we teach and learn. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Emma Zone. She is Senior Director of Academic Affairs at D2L. She has spent nearly 25 years spanning K-12, community colleges, universities, and various EdTech leadership. Dr. Zone has dedicated her career to redefining learning strategies, advancing faculty engagement, and expanding access to education across modalities. From overseeing nearly 900 faculty and 2,500 online students as vice provost to leading national conversations on educational technology, her insights and expertise are truly unparalleled. You can tell I like to butter y'all up. So in this episode, we're going to dive into how technology can build bridges across campuses, strengthening collaboration, fostering open communication, and creating a sense of community among faculty, even in hybrid and online settings. So Dr. Zone will share strategies for some of these things that I've just mentioned, but let's go ahead and dive in. Yeah. And my first question for you is, did I miss anything in that introduction?
No, lots of different experiences, people, places. One thing, it was actually 25,000 students, not 2,500. So a lot of students, a lot of faculty, but really one theme, which is how do we engage with all these different voices? So I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into the conversation, right? Collaboration, it's a big buzzword, but it's not always easy to get right. What are some ways that leaders can create an environment where faculty feel empowered to work together, especially in regards to hybrid and online settings?
Yeah, this is a challenge, but also I think an opportunity. The better part of my career has been in situations where I'm either leading or participating in teams that are not co-located. And I think there's actually some magic there, just in the same way that I say that online learning allows for a more persistent experience in a lot of cases because it's ever present. I think it's a similar thing when we talk about collaboration across teams, whether it's online, hybrid, or even face-to-face. And so I think there are a few different tools. The first, being able to set up ongoing communities of practice through technology solutions, whether that's through IM or other opportunities, I think can create a human approach, just like we talk about humanizing online learning. We can talk about that with leadership and collaboration, right? So in my experience, the best way to do that is to, number one, be the leader who provides those opportunities and uses them, isn't afraid to have those ongoing conversations, and understanding that not everything has to happen in a meeting, right? I think getting away from the persistent meeting culture and allowing for more organic collaboration and finding ways to capture that, I think, is absolutely critical, because sometimes people don't have their best aha moments when we're sitting either physically together or even collaboratively, like on a Zoom. So we need to find ways to create those ongoing wiki experiences in a way for people to be able to share and collaborate. So I think that's a key piece of that strategy.
So, one thing that leads me to kind of question, or the curiosity it leads me to, is, did you notice it become easier after we got through the pandemic?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I think it allowed people to become a bit more normalized to what it means to not have like that physical water cooler talk in some cases. I think some people, it created some backlash, right? Because they were very tired of only connecting virtually. So I think it sort of depends on having a good pulse on your team, the collaboration that's happening within that team, people's personalities. So it's understanding not only the work that's being done, but the people who are a part of that work. And I think it depends, right? There's an appetite for some of that type of interaction, but for others who maybe weren't as used to it, I think they were anxious to potentially get back together. So it does sort of depend, but the key part is, who are you working with? How is the team kind of cross-pollinating and generating these ideas? And how can we utilize technology in a positive way so that people don't feel like it's invasive, but on the other hand, see it as an opportunity to have ongoing connection?
No, I like that. And it's a good transition kind of into my next talking point. Technology has changed the game for how we communicate, not just in higher ed, but in the world in general. What are some ways that tools like D2L can help institutions step up their communication efforts? And how do we keep things feeling personal in the process? And it doesn't have to be D2L. I mean, that's your own, but if it's D2L or Microsoft Teams, or what is it that you've found effective?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think even when we talk about D2L and Brightspace, for example, I think most people think about, okay, well, it's a learning management system. It's a place for content to live. And that's not necessarily the main thing that I would talk about. I would talk about it as the collaboration hub, right? And so I think there's some different ways to do that. I think number one, it's utilizing it to be able to, again, understand who your audience is and how to best reach that audience. I think it can be a time saver. So in our case of teaching and learning and talking to educators or centers for teaching and learning or other groups that might be providing, whether it's professional learning or learning to students, how we're really thinking through how to leverage that technology in a way that saves time for folks. My mind also goes to the power of technology to be able to do things like reach students, community members, and parents, for example, at least in the P12 setting, and then students in the higher ed setting, in a way that helps to increase attendance and engagement with the institution. I know that we're seeing some dips in that across all of our sectors. So if we can find ways to galvanize strategic initiatives utilizing technology, I think that's one really smart way to do that. And then, of course, there are neat tools built in, right? So like in Brightspace, we have intelligent agents, so we can create ongoing conversation to make sure that we're really reaching out to different parties based on their need at that given time. So I think it's just thinking through what that strategy looks like, and whether it is one tool or multiple tools. I think most institutions and organizations have lots of different tools. Figuring out who the audience is and what's going to be most consumable. And then ultimately also simplifying some of that, I think, is key.
And I like that. Departmentally, for us here in ed tech at the college, we know what's constantly coming out. We try to keep up with what's new, but we don't get to try out everything that's new. And just because we latch onto something we see as effective for student engagement, we know that it's not, oh, let's immediately take this and present it to everybody and get everybody to buy in. Because there's always something new and shiny, and somebody's always finding something to bring to you that's got that squirrel eye, it's going to catch your attention briefly.
Yep.
There's just so much now with the speed of technology is what I'm getting at.
Yes.
It's so, for me, and please correct me if you feel differently, but the platform is less important than learning to adapt to the modalities.
I think that's part of it for sure. I mean, I think it's understanding, again, the strategy, the audience, and also recognizing that there's an element of play and an element of messiness with all of this. And I think that can be really hard when you're looking at an organization that, like a school setting, whatever level of school you're talking about, when you're looking at an organization that maybe has a bit of resistance to change, or there's a lot of different initiatives going on, right? People can sometimes be maybe a little bit hesitant to take and try something new, like you're saying, and they get a bit of fatigue. So to your point, well done that the team isn't constantly throwing new stuff out there, because that can also be overwhelming. But I think part of it too is how do we start to create some playgrounds or maker spaces for people to be able to play around with some of these tools and reimagine what they might mean for them, their context, their students, the faculty with whom they work, et cetera, right? So it's allowing for some of that messiness, because we don't always give adults permission to do that in professional settings. And especially in higher ed, where we really like to be right and we really like to be experts, sometimes admitting we don't know how to do something, or admitting there's more than one way to get to some particular outcome, can be tough for folks. So I think being able to create those different spaces to have that experimentation, have that messiness, have a little bit of play, because what tool works for one might not work as well for another, but it allows for maybe some of that experimentation to occur. And I think that's critical in the innovation conversation as well.
No, absolutely. And with so many things that are coming out, it's not even just about rollout of new things. If you're talking about technology broadly, the technology behind the theory of teaching an 8-week course, the technology of converting to a hybrid course, the theory of adapting to things like artificial intelligence, that's all technology that we're not even control of, right? But when it is in our purview and we look at rolling out technology, we know that there's going to be challenges. So what communication strategies have you seen work well to ensure that as many people as possible, from faculty to students, are on that same page for transitions of that we have control over?
Sure. Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because I think in my experience, both as an administrator, so I was a vice provost where we were launching, for example, a new learning management system, launching a mobile app, some other things. Now in my current role as Senior Director of Academic Affairs, being able to be witness to institutions that are going through these changes and transitions. I think one of the key things is we hear the phrase communication strategy and people think, and I've said this before, and I say it a lot, they think, oh, it's an email sequence, or we'll send a few emails and that's our communication strategy. That's how we'll tell faculty, that's how we'll let students know. And that is one piece to a communication strategy. But when you're talking about true transformational change in any type of innovation, whether that's technology, whether that's something having to do with a new approach in terms of the teaching and learning that's happening, maybe it's a new pedagogical approach, problem-based learning, adaptive learning, you name it. If we're not involving all of the stakeholders early on to get feedback and be a part of that rollout, we're really doing the entire initiative a disservice. And I think one of the hardest things that is a part of that communication strategy is also leaving space for people to give feedback. And as a leader, being okay to get feedback that you might not want to hear. And I think that's really difficult because we're all goal oriented. We all want to make sure that we can meet deadlines and, you know, we've been charged to do X, Y, Z. But if it's at the expense of ultimate long-term success, hitting the goal or deadline just for that sake doesn't really make sense. So for me, the communication strategy pieces that work well is making sure we're involving stakeholders early on, making sure we're getting faculty feedback, listening more than talking, understanding what students think, and not just having it be a one and done. Oh yeah, we asked faculty, they said this, and so we're good there. It's like, no, like people's opinions change, and as time goes on, their experiences with a certain technology might change. They may have some aha moments that are really important to inform the overall process or strategy here. How are we ensuring we're engaging all of those voices in a way that's meaningful? And that does multiple things for us, right? Number one, it ensures that people are aware that these changes are coming, or something's new, or there's a new initiative. But more importantly, it allows for a level of buy-in that a simple email chain will never get to, right? So it allows for people to be a part of it. It allows for people to give feedback. It allows for ongoing dialogue and communication. And ultimately, it allows for better outcomes for whatever the initiative was. So if I could like leave people with one thing, it's that a communication strategy is not an email sequence, right? That's a part of it, but you have to do more throughout the process. And I think that is why, you know, when I think about successful initiatives, either that I've been a part of or have seen, it's when people do that. It's when they're not afraid to hear the things that are hard to hear, and they're open to that ongoing feedback. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be negative, right? Sometimes people, it's more positive than we thought it would be, right? So that's great too, because we're understanding where there's the appetite for these types of initiatives or new technologies, or not. And I think that's a really critical piece to that conversation around the success of these implementations.
No, I'm with you there. Like I love and I really encourage my direct reports to tell me when they disagree with me, when they think I'm wrong, because that's when I'm going to have an opportunity to learn and improve myself. And when you're talking about like how you're approaching like a new LMS and the stakeholders and all your different users, it really reminds me of how you approach, you know, something like an integrated marketing communications campaign. You have to deal with the demographic. You have to deal with feedback loops. And because our audience here for professional development is, you know, not just higher ed, like in some settings in a corporate, it could take 6 months, whereas for us in higher ed, it could take 2 years. And so that leads into the next one. It's, you know, the messaging is critical, but timing is incredibly important. So what is your advice when it comes to balancing that need to provide detailed information, but keeping in mind your different end users and not overwhelming those that are less familiar or confusing those in the middle of the ground or frustrating those that are advanced users?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, it's interesting, right? As an educator, this is a place where the leader educator has to come into play, right? How are we differentiating readiness, messaging, again, knowing intimately where people stand. And that's also why the feedback loop becomes so critical, because if you put together a task force of early adopters on something, well, the likelihood that their feedback is a lot more positive in the name of getting something pushed across sooner, sure, that will probably be successful. But then to your point, what about those who either are very hesitant, maybe they don't even know what to ask, right? So I think it's number one, knowing the sort of pulse of, again, the people that you are serving. And regardless of the organization that you're a part of, whether you're talking, corporate, higher ed, K-12, P-12 setting, always coming back to the mission and understanding who are we serving in this process. And I think that when you're making decisions from a mission-driven place, it helps you understand the context of the situation and also where you can push and pull. That isn't to say that it has to be an endless feedback opportunity. There has to be a point where we're also moving forward. But I think if you've thought through sort of, again, who are these end users? How are we getting this feedback? Where is there going to maybe be some discomfort? And how can we start to address that, or at least validate that exists, not necessarily solve for everything, then we're able to move things forward. I think the other big issue is we can't boil the ocean with a lot of this. We have to take it step by step. And that's a piece that is sometimes hard to step back and understand that. But if you're getting ongoing good feedback and you are understanding who your stakeholders are, you'll be more successful.
I like that. So one thing I'm starting to think is I'm going to have to bring you back to talk about project management and relations to communication. So, oh my gosh, like that is your insights there. I feel like would be right up in line with what I'm finding is my new hobby, project management. What's wrong with my age? But when we're talking about things like introducing tools to make life easier, you do need plans. So how do we ensure that the communication around the plans and around our goals are going to meet at the end?
Yeah, that's great. So again, great lessons from good teaching, right? Are we starting with the end in mind? What's the ultimate outcome? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to learn? I think that part's a little bit easier for us in probably our space when we're talking about maybe the audience of folks with whom we work. So I think that's a key part of it. And geez, when you talk about the planning side of it, it's funny you say that about project management. I think I am a horrible project manager. I give so much credence to folks who are legit project managers and can Gantt chart till the cows come home, because I am not that person, but respect that so much, because I think when you have a solid project plan in place, it makes such a big difference. But I also think one of the keys to that is the collaboration side of it and making sure that you're bringing in those kind of different disparate points of view. So interesting that you say that. So I think part of it is definitely starting with the end in mind and understanding what are the resources that are needed in the meantime to get us there. And are we over or under resourced in a particular area? And that includes human resources, right? Who are the people that need to be a part of those conversations? And ultimately, where does their expertise lie? Or are we going externally to these types of communities like how we met? And whether you're talking about professional development communities within an organization or external, many of us are a part of those. And how are we really thinking about relying on networks to inform planning, not just staying in our bubble of our own microcosm of a particular organization, but really reaping the benefit of these are the outcomes we're going for. You may have done a project like this previously. What worked, what didn't, right? So kind of crowdsourcing to rely on folks to be able to meet an end goal in a way that maybe didn't cross your mind to begin with, because everyone has a different perspective. So I think there's a magic in that sort of external community as well. That's a really critical part of this.
I like it. So what are your big secrets? Like, this is the last, let's get creative thinking question. Yeah. What are your big secrets to keeping a communication strategy simple and effective?
Yes, simple is key. That was the other thing I would have said about the outcome side of it, making sure that you're not over wording, right? I'm an English major and English professor by trade when I first started my career. So being able to simplify and not use so many words has been a key thing, right? How do you give directed, communicative directions or emails or whatever happens to be that are actionable and easy to consume. So I think, I don't know if it's like a secret, but I think it is being less is more, and also relying on channels that people are already using. I think one mistake that we make is we either create too many options for people, like, oh, you can access this information this way or this way or this way or this way. And we think that's really helpful because we're going to send an email, then we're going to put an announcement on a portal somewhere, and then we're also going to send a text, and then we're also going to, and there are cases where those multi-channels are really important. But sometimes I think when we create too many options, people don't know where to go, and then it becomes really confusing. Sometimes the best path is a single path and a simple path. It doesn't always have to be a choose your own adventure to get information. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate things by offering too much choice, right? Or too many channels. So I think just being smart, again, about understanding audience, purpose, outcome for the project, and ultimately simplification. And clearly my verbose answer is not a good example of this right now, but you'll indulge me, is a really important part of it, right? And having people, especially, we live in a culture of very quick information, right? I think about my teenagers, they're not reading long emails from anybody. They want quick information. And so how are we understanding the way that communication styles and desires have shifted, and really meeting those needs where we can?
No, you really do. And you take the modality into consideration. To your point, I mean, there's everything from the short, simple, to the point email to something enjoyable like this, which you can consume in 20 to 30 minutes in a podcast format, and everything in between, right?
Yeah.
So Dr. Stone, for Emma, I apologize. Is there anything I missed? Anything you'd like to add before we go today?
I don't think so. Great questions, great conversation. I think, the big thing here is that community and ongoing collaboration wins the day. And I'm sure that's a theme in other conversations you've had, but I think whether you're talking about new technology implementations or other projects or leadership in general, when we have a community of practice, when we lean into what we are good at, good things happen, we make change, and we enjoy what we do. And I think that's really what we're trying to do here in this space as well. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no. Again, DEscussions, Brad Dennison here. I've just been chatting with Dr. Emma Zone, Senior Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and honestly, just a fascinatingly talented background in general. So look her up, check out her podcast, check out her work in general online, and genuinely, I hope I get to have you back. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, appreciate it.